Sarah Martinez stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of the fancy downtown hotel. Her hands trembled as she applied lipstick for the third time, wiping it off each time because it looked wrong. Tonight was supposed to be the most important night of her life, but instead of excitement, her stomach churned with anxiety and shame. At 28, Sarah had built a successful marketing consultancy from nothing. She worked 16-hour days, missed family gatherings, and turned down dates because building her empire came first. Her dedication had paid off financially, but socially, she felt like a complete failure. The invitation sitting on her dresser proved it. Her high school reunion was tomorrow night and everyone would be there. Everyone, including her ex-boyfriend Jake, who had dumped her senior year saying she cared more about her grades than their relationship. The worst part was seeing his engagement announcement on social media last month. He was marrying Rebecca, the homecoming queen who had made Sarah's life miserable throughout school. Sarah had RSVP'd yes to the reunion 6 months ago, confident she would have an impressive date to bring. She imagined walking in with someone handsome and successful, proving to everyone that she had made it. But as the date approached, her dating life remained as empty as her refrigerator. Her assistant Maya had jokingly suggested hiring someone, after Sarah complained about going alone for the 100th time. The idea seemed ridiculous at first, but as the reunion grew closer, Sarah found herself researching escort services online late at night. Not for anything inappropriate, just companionship for one evening. That's how she discovered Elite Companions, a high-end agency that provided sophisticated dates for business events and social gatherings. Their website looked professional, featuring well-dressed men and women who could blend into any upscale environment. The prices made her gasp, but Sarah had money. What she lacked was time to build real relationships. After 3 sleepless nights, she made the call. The woman who answered spoke with a crisp British accent and treated the conversation like any other business transaction. Sarah explained she needed a date for her high school reunion, someone educated and charming who could make her look successful and happy. The agency sent her several profiles. Most looked too young or too obvious, but then she saw Marcus Thompson. His photo showed a man in his early 30s with kind eyes and a genuine smile. His biography listed a business degree, experience in finance, and fluency in 3 languages. He looked exactly like the type of man she would naturally date if she had time for relationships. The agency quoted her $10,000 for the entire evening, including preparation time, dinner, and staying until midnight. Sarah's practical mind screamed that the amount was insane, but her desperate heart whispered that it was worth it for one night of feeling normal. She met Marcus 3 days before the reunion at a coffee shop downtown. Sarah had prepared a list of topics they should discuss and stories about their supposed relationship. But when Marcus walked in, her preparation seemed unnecessary. He was even more handsome in person, dressed casually, but expensively. His handshake was firm, and his smile reached his eyes. Instead of feeling like a business transaction, their meeting felt like a real date. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about her business and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. He shared stories from his own life that made her laugh, and she found herself forgetting why they were really meeting. They spent 2 hours crafting their backstory. They had supposedly met at a charity fundraiser 8 months ago and had been dating ever since. Marcus worked in investment banking, which explained his expensive clothes and confident manner. They decided he would be supportive but not overly affectionate, striking the right balance for someone she was seriously dating, but not yet engaged to. As they prepared to leave, Marcus touched her hand gently. His skin was warm, and Sarah felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. For a moment, she imagined this was real, that she had actually met someone wonderful who cared about her. The fantasy shattered when Marcus pulled out a business card and reminded her about the final payment arrangements. The spell broke, and Sarah remembered she was paying him to pretend to like her. The realization stung more than she expected. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into preparation with the same intensity she brought to her business deals. She bought a new dress that cost more than most people spent on rent, got her hair professionally styled, and even hired a makeup artist. If she was going to pay $10,000 for a date, she would make sure she looked worthy of it. The morning of the reunion, Sarah woke up feeling sick. She had barely slept, tossing and turning while imagining all the ways the evening could go wrong. What if people figured out Marcus was hired? What if Jake saw through their act? What if she tripped and fell in her expensive heels? She called her sister Emma, desperate for someone to talk her out of the whole thing. But Emma lived across the country with her own family and couldn't understand why Sarah cared so much about impressing people from high school. Their conversation ended with Sarah feeling more alone than ever. Standing in her hotel room that afternoon, Sarah questioned every decision that had led her to this moment. She had worked so hard to build a successful life, but success felt hollow when you had nobody to share it with. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was paying someone to care about her for one evening. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus confirming their meeting time. His message was professional but included a small personal touch, asking if she was nervous and reminding her that everything would be fine. Despite knowing it was probably part of his professional routine, the gesture comforted her. Sarah finished, getting ready, and took one last look in the mirror. She looked successful and confident, exactly the image she wanted to project. But underneath the perfect exterior, she felt like the same insecure girl who had been invisible in high school, as Nier. She grabbed her purse and headed toward the door. Sarah made a silent promise to herself. After tonight, she would make changes. She would stop hiding behind work and start building real relationships. She would stop caring what other people thought and start living for herself. But first, she had to get through one evening of pretending. Her life was perfect. She just hoped the performance would be worth $10,000 and the pieces of her heart she was afraid she might lose in the process. Sarah arrived at the hotel lobby 15 minutes early, her palms sweating despite the air conditioning. She had changed purses twice and checked her appearance in every reflective surface between her room and the elevator. The elegant lobby buzzed with well-dressed people heading out for their Saturday evening plans, making her feel both overdressed and completely ordinary at the same time. When Marcus walked through the revolving doors at exactly 7 o'clock, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. He looked stunning in a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than her car payment. His dark hair was styled just messy enough to look effortless, and his smile when he spotted her seemed warm and genuine. But as he approached, Sarah noticed something in his eyes that hadn't been there during their coffee meeting. A professional distance, like a mask sliding into place. The realization that their previous connection had been part of his job hit her harder than she expected. Marcus greeted her with a light kiss on the cheek, his cologne expensive and subtle. To anyone watching, they looked like a successful couple meeting for an important evening out. His hand found the small of her back as he guided her toward the car he had waiting outside, and Sarah tried to ignore how natural the gesture felt. The ride to the reunion venue took 20 minutes through downtown traffic. Marcus filled the silence with easy conversation about the weather and the city's restaurant scene, but Sarah could barely focus on his words. Her mind raced with last-minute doubts and the growing certainty that everyone would see through their charade immediately. The reunion was being held at the Grandview Country Club, the same venue where their senior prom had taken place 10 years earlier. Sarah remembered feeling invisible that night too, standing against the wall while couples danced and laughed together. She had gone with her friend Tyler as a friend date, both of them more interested in the buffet than the dancing. Their car pulled into the circular driveway. Sarah saw familiar faces walking toward the entrance. Her former classmates looked older and more sophisticated than she remembered, but she recognized most of them despite the years. Her stomach clenched when she spotted Jake getting out of a black BMW with Rebecca, who looked exactly like she had in high school except with an expensive engagement ring catching the evening light. Marcus must have noticed her tension because he reached over and gently squeezed her hand. The gesture was probably calculated to look natural from the outside, but his touch was warm and reassuring. For a moment, Sarah let herself imagine he actually cared about her comfort. They walked into the country club together, Marcus's hand resting lightly on her back. The ballroom had been decorated with their school colors and photos from their senior year, bringing back a flood of memories Sarah had tried to forget. She saw pictures of herself in the academic achievement section, always alone or with teachers, never part of the social groups that had dominated high school life. The registration table was staffed by former student council members who squealed with recognition when they saw Sarah approaching. Their eyes immediately shifted to Marcus with obvious curiosity and approval. Sarah introduced him as her boyfriend, the lie rolling off her tongue more easily than she had expected. Marcus played his part perfectly, shaking hands with enthusiasm and asking thoughtful questions about Sarah's high school experiences. He laughed at the right moments when they shared embarrassing stories and looked at Sarah with what appeared to be genuine affection. His performance was so convincing that Sarah almost forgot it wasn't real. They made their way to the cocktail reception, where Sarah immediately recognized the same social dynamics that had ruled their teenage years. The popular crowd clustered around the bar, while the quieter students gathered near the appetizer tables. Some things never changed. Even after 10 years, Sarah spotted her former lab partner, Michelle, who rushed over with genuine excitement. Michelle had been one of the few people who had been consistently kind to Sarah in high school, never caring about social hierarchies or popularity contests. Her greeting was warm and real, unlike the fake enthusiasm Sarah expected from others. Michelle's husband turned out to be a software engineer who immediately connected with Marcus over technology trends. As the men talked, Sarah relaxed slightly, grateful that Marcus could hold his own in any conversation. His preparation for this evening had clearly been thorough. The dinner bell chimed, and couples began moving toward the dining room. Sarah and Marcus found their assigned table, which unfortunately included Jake and Rebecca, along with several other members of their former graduating class. Sarah's heart sank as she realized she would be spending the entire meal under Jake's scrutiny. Jake looked exactly like Sarah remembered, still handsome with the same confident smile that had made her teenage heart race. But sitting next to him, Rebecca had transformed from a pretty teenager into a stunning woman who looked like she belonged in a magazine. Her dress probably cost more than Sarah's entire outfit, and her engagement ring was massive enough to be visible from across the room. The introductions around the table were awkward, with Jake's eyes lingering on Sarah longer than necessary, while Rebecca assessed Marcus like she was calculating his worth. Other couples shared updates about their careers, marriages, and children, while Sarah tried to look comfortable and happy. Marcus seamlessly joined the conversation, describing his supposed work in investment banking and sharing amusing stories about business travel. He mentioned vacations he and Sarah had supposedly taken together, weaving details they had discussed during their preparation meeting. His stories were convincing and entertaining, making Sarah appear well-traveled and adventurous. When Jake asked how long they had been dating, Marcus reached over and took Sarah's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers as he shared their fabricated love story. The contact sent an unexpected warmth up Sarah's arm, and she found herself leaning slightly toward him as he spoke. Their chemistry appeared natural and comfortable, exactly what she had hoped for. But as the evening progressed, Sarah noticed Jake watching her with increasing intensity. During the salad course, he leaned over and quietly asked if he could speak with her privately. Sarah's pulse quickened, uncertain whether she wanted to know what he had to say. Rebecca was deep in conversation with another woman about wedding planning, giving Jake the opportunity to move his chair closer to Sarah's. His proximity brought back memories of their teenage relationship, both good and painful. Marcus noticed the interaction and shot Sarah a questioning look, his professional concern masked as boyfriendly protectiveness. Jake's voice was low when he finally spoke, meant only for Sarah's ears. His words would change the entire trajectory of her evening and challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and her past. The conversation she had been both dreading and anticipating for 10 years was about to begin, and Sarah realized she was completely unprepared for what Jake was about to reveal. Jake's words hit Sarah like a physical blow, even though he spoke barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something I should have said 10 years ago. Breaking up with you was the biggest mistake of my life." Sarah's fork froze halfway to her mouth, her carefully applied composure cracking for just a moment before she remembered where they were. Around the table, conversations continued about mortgages and career changes while her world tilted sideways. She glanced at Rebecca, who was still discussing flower arrangements with another classmate, completely unaware of her fiancé's confession. Marcus noticed Sarah's sudden tension and smoothly inserted himself into the conversation by asking Jake about his work. The interruption gave Sarah a moment to recover, but Jake's words echoed in her mind. This was not how she had imagined the evening would go. During the main course, Jake found more opportunities to speak quietly with Sarah, while Rebecca remained distracted. He told her about his college years, how he had started to call her dozens of times, but never found the courage. He described watching her succeed from afar through mutual friends and social media, feeling proud but also regretful that he wasn't part of her journey. Sarah listened with growing confusion and anger. Where had these feelings been when she needed them most? Where was this honesty during the years when she lay awake wondering if she had been worth loving at all? His timing felt cruel and selfish, coming on the night of his engagement celebration with another woman sitting right beside him. Marcus played his role perfectly throughout dinner, but Sarah could see him becoming genuinely concerned about her emotional state. He made subtle attempts to redirect Jake's attention and included Rebecca in conversations whenever possible. His protectiveness felt real, which only added to Sarah's emotional turmoil. As dessert was served, the reunion organizers announced that dancing would begin shortly in the adjacent ballroom. Sarah's stomach dropped at the thought of more intimate conversations with Jake while slow songs played. She needed air and space to process what was happening. She excused herself to the restroom, with Marcus offering to escort her before she quickly declined. In the ladies' room mirror, Sarah saw that her makeup remained perfect, but her eyes revealed the chaos brewing inside her mind. She had paid $10,000 to look successful and happy, but she felt more confused than ever. When she returned to the table, she found Marcus engaged in conversation with Rebecca, while Jake stepped away to take a phone call. Rebecca was asking Marcus detailed questions about his work and their relationship, her tone friendly but probing. Sarah realized with growing horror that Rebecca's questions were becoming more specific than Marcus could handle based on their brief preparation. Rebecca asked about Sarah's apartment, which Marcus had never seen. She wanted to know about Sarah's family, details they hadn't covered in their coffee meeting. Most dangerously, she asked about specific restaurants and events in the city, testing whether Marcus really lived there or was just visiting. Sarah jumped in quickly, redirecting the conversation and making excuses about Marcus's recent travel schedule affecting his memory of local details. But she could see suspicion growing in Rebecca's eyes, and panic began building in her chest. If Rebecca figured out the truth, the humiliation would be worse than coming alone. Jake returned from his phone call looking distressed. He sat down heavily and announced that his business partner had been in a car accident and was being rushed to the hospital. He needed to leave immediately, but Rebecca wanted to stay for the dancing portion of the reunion. The tension at the table became thick enough to cut. Rebecca clearly didn't want her fiancé leaving her at the reunion, especially with his ex-girlfriend present. Jake seemed torn between his business obligation and his obvious desire to continue talking with Sarah. The situation was spiraling beyond anything Sarah had prepared for. Marcus stepped in with a solution that surprised everyone. He offered to drive Rebecca home later so Jake could go to the hospital without worry. His gesture was generous and practical, but it would mean Sarah would be left essentially alone at her reunion with everyone watching the drama unfold. Rebecca accepted Marcus's offer but insisted that Sarah and Marcus join them on the dance floor before Jake left. The four of them walked into the ballroom together, where their former classmates were already swaying to music that had been popular during their senior year. The first song was upbeat, allowing for casual group dancing that masked the tension between them. But when the music shifted to a slow ballad, couples paired off around the room. Jake took Rebecca into his arms with obvious reluctance, while Marcus extended his hand to Sarah with professional courtesy. Dancing with Marcus felt different from their earlier interactions. His hand was warm against her back and he held her at exactly the right distance to look romantic without being inappropriate. But Sarah couldn't focus on the moment because she was watching Jake over Marcus's shoulder, seeing the longing in his eyes as he looked at her instead of his fiancé. The song seemed to last forever, with Sarah caught between the man she was paying to care about her and the man who claimed to have always cared about her but had chosen someone else. When the music finally ended, Jake announced he had to leave for the hospital. But instead of simply saying goodbye to the group, Jake approached Sarah directly. In front of Marcus, Rebecca, and anyone else who might be watching, he took her hands in his and spoke words that would shatter her carefully constructed evening into pieces. His voice was urgent and desperate as he said, "Sarah, I know this is terrible timing, but I can't let another 10 years pass without telling you the truth. I'm not happy. I haven't been happy since I let you go. Rebecca is wonderful, but she's not you. She's never been you." The words hung in the air like an explosion, with Rebecca's sharp intake of breath cutting through the music around them. Sarah felt Marcus's hand touch her shoulder, steadying her as the moment she had fantasized about for years finally arrived in the worst possible circumstances. Rebecca's face went through a series of emotions, from shock to hurt to fury, as she processed what her fiancé had just confessed in front of dozens of their former classmates. The fairy tale evening Sarah had carefully orchestrated was about to become a nightmare that would follow her for years to come. Rebecca's voice cut through the music like a knife, sharp and loud enough for nearby couples to stop dancing and stare. "Are you seriously doing this right now, Jake? At our reunion? In front of everyone?" The ballroom seemed to pause around them, conversation stopping as people sensed the drama unfolding. Sarah felt dozens of eyes turning toward their group, her worst nightmare of being the center of negative attention coming true in spectacular fashion. Jake ran his hands through his hair, his composure finally cracking under the weight of his confession. "Rebecca, I'm sorry. I didn't plan for this to happen. But I can't marry you when I'm still in love with someone else. It wouldn't be fair to either of us." Sarah stood frozen between them, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what was happening. The validation she had craved for 10 years was finally here, but it came wrapped in public humiliation and the destruction of someone else's relationship. This wasn't how she had imagined getting closure with Jake. Marcus stepped closer to Sarah, his professional training kicking in as he assessed the rapidly deteriorating situation. His job was to make her look good, but this scenario was beyond anything their preparation had covered. He whispered quietly in her ear, "We should leave. Now." But before Sarah could respond, Rebecca turned her fury directly on her. "This is rich, Sarah. You couldn't get a date to your own reunion, so you hired one, and now you're trying to steal my fiancé too?" The accusation hit Sarah like a slap, and she felt the blood drain from her face. Rebecca had figured out the truth about Marcus, and now she was weaponizing it in front of everyone. Sarah opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Rebecca continued her attack, her voice rising with each word. "Did you really think nobody would notice? Your boyfriend doesn't know anything about your life. He couldn't even remember which side of town you live on. How much did you pay him, Sarah? Was it worth it to pretend you're not alone?" The gathered crowd gasped at Rebecca's revelation, and Sarah heard whispers spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Marcus surprised everyone by stepping forward, his voice calm but firm. "That's enough. You're hurt and angry, which is understandable, but attacking Sarah isn't going to fix your relationship problems." His defense of Sarah was swift and genuine, but it also confirmed Rebecca's accusation by not denying it. The damage was done, and Sarah could feel the stares and whispers intensifying around them. Jake looked confused, trying to process both his crumbling engagement and the revelation about Sarah's date. "Is it true? Did you hire him?" Sarah finally found her voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. "Jake, I can explain." But Rebecca wasn't finished. Her pain had transformed into cruel satisfaction as she realized she could destroy Sarah's reputation along with their relationship. "Explain what? That you're so desperate for attention that you paid someone to pretend to love you? That this whole thing is as fake as your success story?" The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Sarah had built her entire identity around her professional success, but Rebecca was right about one thing. She had been desperately lonely underneath it all. The truth of it burned through her chest like fire. Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of maintaining Professional distance, he put his arm around Sarah's shoulders and addressed the crowd that had gathered to watch the spectacle. "Yes, Sarah hired me to be her date tonight," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "And I'm honored she chose me. She's brilliant, successful, and kind. If she needed someone to help her feel confident tonight, that says more about all of you than it does about her." His words created a moment of stunned silence, but they also gave Sarah a chance to find her strength. She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Rebecca, then at Jake, and finally at the crowd of former classmates who were staring at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. "Rebecca's right," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I hired Marcus because I was afraid to come here alone. I was afraid you'd all judge me for focusing on my career instead of finding someone to complete me. But you know what? I'm not ashamed of my success, and I'm not ashamed of being alone." She turned to Jake, who was still standing there looking, lost and confused. "And Jake, 10 years too late doesn't count. You don't get to blow up your life and someone else's engagement because you finally figured out what you want. I deserved better then, and I deserve better now." The crowd began to murmur, some nodding in agreement with Sarah's words while others continued to stare in fascination at the unfolding drama. Sarah realized this was her moment to either crumble under the humiliation or take control of her own narrative. She looked at Marcus, seeing something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, respect, and maybe something deeper. "Thank you for defending me. You didn't have to do that." Marcus smiled, and for the first time all evening it felt completely genuine. "Yes, I did. What she said was wrong, regardless of our arrangement." Rebecca, realizing she had lost the moral high ground, grabbed her purse and pushed through the crowd toward the exit. Jake called after her, but she didn't stop. He looked back at Sarah one more time as if hoping she might chase after him or beg him to choose her. Instead, Sarah took Marcus's hand and walked with dignity toward the bar, leaving Jake standing, alone in the middle of the dance floor. She could feel everyone's eyes following them, but for the first time all evening, she didn't care what they thought. At the bar, Marcus ordered them both drinks while Sarah tried to process everything that had just happened. Her $10,000 evening had exploded into public humiliation, but somehow she felt lighter than she had in years. "I'm sorry," she told Marcus as he handed her a glass of wine. "This wasn't what you signed up for." He studied her face carefully before responding, and Sarah realized she was about to learn something about him that would change everything about their arrangement. Marcus set down his drink and looked directly into Sarah's eyes, his professional mask finally slipping completely away. "I need to tell you something, and after tonight, you deserve complete honesty." Sarah braced herself for another revelation, wondering if this evening could possibly get any more complicated. Around them, the reunion continued with people trying to pretend they weren't still whispering about the scene that had just unfolded. "I'm not actually an escort," Marcus said, quietly, his words barely audible over the music. "I mean, I work for the agency, but this is my first and only assignment. I'm a real investment banker, just like we said. I only took this job because—" He paused, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that reminded Sarah painfully of Jake's nervous habit. But when Marcus continued, his words were nothing like anything Jake had ever said to her. "My sister works for Elite Companions. When your request came in, she showed me your photo and told me about what you needed. I had just gone through a terrible breakup with someone who only cared about my money, and I was feeling pretty cynical about relationships. But something about your situation touched me." Sarah stared at him, trying to process this new information, while her mind was still reeling from everything else that had happened. "So you're telling me you're not a professional date?" Marcus shook his head, a rueful smile crossing his face. "I've never done anything like this before. I told my sister I'd help because you seemed genuine in your request, and honestly, I was curious about someone successful enough to run her own business but vulnerable enough to need help with a high school reunion." The revelation should have made Sarah feel better, but instead it made everything worse. "So I paid $10,000 for a pity date? You felt sorry for the pathetic woman who couldn't find her own boyfriend?" "No," Marcus said firmly, reaching for her hand before stopping himself. That's not what this was. When I met you for coffee, I realized you weren't pathetic at all. You were just lonely, and I understood that feeling completely. Sarah pulled her hand away, anger and embarrassment warring in her chest. This is even worse than I thought. At least a real escort would have been honest about what this was. You lied to me just as much as I lied to everyone else tonight. Marcus looked, genuinely pained by her words. You're right, and I'm sorry. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. But Sarah, everything I said about you being brilliant and successful and kind, that was real. Getting to know you these past few days has been the best part of my month. Before Sarah could respond, her former lab partner Michelle appeared, beside them with a concerned expression. Hey, are you okay? That whole thing with Rebecca and Jake was pretty intense. Sarah forced a smile, grateful for Michelle's kindness but not ready to discuss what had happened. I'm fine. Just needed a drink after all the excitement. Michelle nodded but didn't leave. Instead, she looked directly at Marcus with a thoughtful expression. You know, I have to say, what you did back there was really decent. Standing up for Sarah like that took guts, especially with everyone staring. Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Michelle said firmly. They wouldn't have. Most guys would have run for the hills the moment things got messy. The fact that you stayed and defended her says a lot about your character. After Michelle walked away, Sarah and Marcus stood in awkward silence. The evening had become so complicated that Sarah wasn't sure how to feel about anything anymore. Her fake relationship had defended her better than her real ex-boyfriend ever had, but it was still built on a lie. I should go, Sarah said finally. This whole evening has been a disaster and I just want to go home and pretend it never happened. Marcus nodded but looked disappointed. Let me at least drive you back to your hotel. It's the least I can do after everything that's happened. They made their way through the crowd toward the exit, with Sarah keeping her eyes straight ahead to avoid the stares and whispers that followed them. Some of her former classmates looked sympathetic, while others seemed to be enjoying the drama. Sarah realized she would be the talk of their class for years to come. In the car, they rode in silence through the city streets. Sarah stared out the window at the passing lights, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Her plan to impress everyone had backfired spectacularly, but somehow she felt more honest than she had in years. For what it's worth, Marcus said as they pulled up to her hotel. I think you handled everything with incredible grace. Not many people could have faced that situation with such dignity. Sarah laughed bitterly. Dignity? I paid someone to pretend to like me, got publicly humiliated by my ex-boyfriend's fiancé, and became the biggest gossip story of my high school reunion. That's not dignity, that's disaster. Marcus parked the car and turned to face her fully. Sarah, look at me. You built a successful business from nothing. You're intelligent, accomplished, and strong enough to stand up for yourself when it mattered. One bad evening doesn't erase all of that. His words were kind, but Sarah could barely hear them over the voice in her head listing all her failures. She reached for her purse to get the remaining payment she owed him, but Marcus stopped her. I don't want your money, he said quietly. I don't deserve it, and honestly, spending this evening with you has been worth more than any payment. Sarah looked at him suspiciously. Is this part of some extended customer service? Making the client feel better about their humiliation? Marcus was quiet for a long moment before responding. When he finally spoke, his words would force Sarah to reconsider everything she thought she knew about the evening and about herself. I'd like to see you again, he said simply, not as part of any arrangement or business transaction. Just as two people who might actually like each other if we gave it a real chance. Sarah stared at him, wondering if this was another lie or if something genuine had grown from their fabricated relationship. After an evening full of deception and revelation, she wasn't sure she could trust her own judgment anymore. But as she looked into Marcus's eyes, she saw something there that made her heart skip in a way it hadn't in years. The question was whether she was brave enough to find out if it was real. Sarah sat in the car staring at Marcus, her mind racing through everything that had happened in the past few hours. The evening had started with carefully constructed lies and had somehow led to the most honest conversation she'd had with anyone in years. The irony wasn't lost on her that her fake boyfriend was offering her something more real than her actual ex-boyfriend ever had. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do I know this isn't just another performance? How do I know you're not saying what you think I want to hear after the disaster in there?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see him choosing his words carefully. "I guess you don't know. And I can't blame you for not trusting me after I lied about who I was. But Sarah, when Rebecca was attacking you in there, the anger I felt was completely real. When Jake was trying to manipulate you into being his backup plan, I wanted to protect you, and that had nothing to do with any job." Sarah wanted to believe him, but trust felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "Even if you're telling the truth now, how do we get past the fact that this started with me paying you to pretend to care about me? How do we build something real on that foundation?" "Maybe we don't try to build on it," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Maybe we start completely over." "Hi, I'm Marcus Thompson. I'm an investment banker who did something really stupid to help his sister, and I ended up meeting someone amazing in the process." Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling for the first time all evening. "Hi, Marcus. I'm Sarah Martinez. I own a marketing company, and I did something really desperate because I was tired of being alone and wanted to impress people who probably don't matter anyway." They sat in the car talking until almost 2 in the morning, sharing real stories about their lives, their fears, and their dreams. Marcus told her about his difficult childhood with an absent father and how he had worked 3 jobs to put himself through college. Sarah opened up about the loneliness that came with success, how every achievement felt hollow when there was nobody to celebrate with. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself laughing at Marcus's stories and feeling genuinely comfortable for the first time in months. The man sitting beside her was nothing like the polished escort she had hired, or the confident date who had charmed her classmates. He was vulnerable, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth despite his expensive suit. "I have a confession," Marcus said as the conversation began to wind down. "When my sister showed me your request, I almost said no. Not because I thought there was anything wrong with you, but because I was scared I might actually like you. I've been hurt before by people who wanted me for what I could provide rather than who I was." Sarah understood that feeling completely. "Most of the men I've dated were either intimidated by my success or only interested in what my money could do for them. It's easier to focus on work than to keep getting disappointed by people." Marcus reached across the car and gently touched her hand. This time, Sarah didn't pull away. "What if we both stopped being scared? What if we tried being honest with each other and saw what happened?" Sarah looked down at their joined hands, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the car's heating system. "I don't know how to do this, Marcus. I don't know how to trust someone after everything that's happened tonight. And I don't know how to be in a relationship when I've spent so many years building walls around myself." "Then let's figure it out together," Marcus said simply. "No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people getting to know each other without any pretense or performance." As Sarah looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Hope. Not just hope for a relationship, but hope that maybe she didn't have to go through life alone. Maybe the disaster of this evening had actually led her to something real. 3 months later, Sarah found herself getting ready for another evening out with Marcus. But this time, she wasn't applying lipstick with shaking hands or wondering if she looked successful enough. She was excited to spend time with someone who knew all her flaws and insecurities and cared about her anyway. Their relationship hadn't been easy. They'd had long conversations about trust, honesty, and what they both needed from a partnership. Sarah had to learn to let someone see her vulnerable side, while Marcus had to prove that his feelings were genuine and not based on pity or professional obligation. They took things slowly, having real dates where they talked about their actual lives instead of maintaining fake personas. Marcus met her family and friends as himself, not as a hired companion. Sarah learned to share her fears and dreams with someone who listened without judgment. The hardest part had been dealing with the aftermath of the reunion. Word had spread quickly through social media about the dramatic confrontation, and Sarah had to endure weeks of speculation and gossip from people she hadn't thought about in years. But Marcus stood by her through all of it, never making her feel ashamed of the choices that had led them to meet. Jake had tried to contact her several times after the reunion, but Sarah never responded. She had learned that someone who would publicly humiliate their current partner for a chance with someone else wasn't someone she wanted in her life. Rebecca, meanwhile, had apparently called off the engagement and moved to another city to start fresh. Sarah's sister Emma had flown in for a visit and met Marcus over dinner. Afterward, she pulled Sarah aside and said, "I don't know how you two met and I don't care, but I've never seen you this happy. He looks at you like you're the most fascinating person in the room." The comment had made Sarah tear up because it was exactly how she had always wanted someone to look at her. Not like she was successful or impressive, but like she was genuinely interesting and worth knowing. As Sarah finished getting ready for their evening out, she reflected on how much her life had changed. She was still focused on her business, but she had also made room for relationship and personal happiness. She had learned that success without connection was just sophisticated loneliness. Marcus arrived at her apartment with flowers, a small gesture that never failed to make her smile. He kissed her hello, and Sarah marveled at how natural it felt to have someone care about her day and want to share his own experiences with her. "Ready for dinner?" he asked, offering his arm with the same gallant gesture he had used at the reunion. But this time, Sarah knew it came from genuine affection rather than professional training. As they walked to his car, Sarah thought about the $10,000 she had spent for one evening of pretending to be happy. The money had seemed like a fortune at the time, but now she realized it had been the best investment she'd ever made, not because it had impressed anyone at the reunion, but because it had led her to someone who saw through all her defenses and chose to stay anyway. The evening that was supposed to prove she was worth loving had instead taught her that she had always been worth loving. She had just been looking for validation in all the wrong places. And sometimes Sarah reflected as Marcus held the car door open for her. The most unexpected disasters could lead to the most beautiful beginnings. As they drove through the city toward their favorite restaurant, Sarah reached over and took Marcus's hand. The gesture was simple and real, with no audience to perform for and no pretense to maintain. For the first time in her adult life, she was exactly where she wanted to be with exactly the right person, and it hadn't cost her anything except the courage to be vulnerable. The tears that had been threatening all evening finally came, but they were tears of gratitude rather than humiliation. Sometimes getting everything wrong was the only way to finally get something right.